This is an interview on February 19th, 1987 at the home of Paul Olson in Madison. Okay, Paul Olson is quite a famous local conservationist around the Madison area. He's an ex-school teacher, a former school teacher, and then became a principal. He was very active in the establishment of the state chapter of the Nature Conservancy here in Wisconsin, and did some of the very early groundwork in behalf of that cause and out of his home. And Paul was also instrumental in the establishment of the Madison School Forest, which is located near Verona, between Verona and Mount Vernon, the Jackson School Forest. He also was an important factor in establishing the Buena Vista Marsh Prairie complex near Plainfield, which is really the place where pretty much the last bastion of prairie chickens in terms of a stable population exists in the state right now. Paul worked very closely with Francis and Frederick Hammerstrom way back in those days, and today what we're going to try to do is go over some of with Paul, go over some of the early work that he's done in the state in behalf of conservation efforts and the reestablishment of the prairie chicken. And I think I'll, at this point, just have Paul start out by talking about what he recalls in his work with the prairie chicken and with the Hammerstroms, also with a man by the name Paul mentioned before we were on tape, by the name of Ozzie Madden or Madsen, that was also important in those early prairie chicken efforts. Paul, I think I'll just turn it over to you and just let you go with it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I frankly didn't know a prairie chicken, I don't think, from a robin, probably. I went up there with a couple of people from the Madison area, Gene Rourke and who did work for the department at one time, and Buzz Holland, who was active in conservation work at that time. And we saw prairie chickens booming, and went up to the Hammerstroms, and it was indeed an eye-opener for me. And afterwards, of course, they were talking in those days about land acquisition. They didn't have very much land. I think maybe they had 80 acres or so at that time. And Ozzie Matson, who has been mentioned, took me out to see an area, and we bought or agreed to buy a piece, that is the Dane County Conservation League, for $800. It was a 40-acre piece. And well, we came back to the Dane County Conservation League. I was the secretary at that time of the league, and asked the boys for $200 as a startup operation, and we got started. And we spent pretty close to a year in getting that paid for. $2, $10, that sort of thing. But we did indeed do that. I noticed, by the way, just as a matter of passing interest, that today Judge Doyle came out in favor of the Chippewa Indians and their treaty rights for hunting and fishing in Wisconsin. Judge Doyle was the attorney for the company up there at that time. He was not a judge then, but this, I think, was 1958. I'm not sure. The years kind of all merged together, and so on. But it was about 1958. Maybe it was earlier than that, but not much. Then, through a whole series of fortunate accidents, we got going. All life is accidental, from the very beginning. Everything is accident. Fortunate circumstances that come together here and there. Well, forgotten the guy who was Wilbur Stites, it was, who used to put out a conservation release from the department on public radio. And we went down to WHA, that is we, I mean Fran and Fred and I, and we talked about prairie chicken. And a little later, perhaps several months later, and I've never heard the forecast or the broadcast because I was in school when those things came out and I wasn't able to listen very well. A fellow called me from Racine. His name was Bill Pugh. He's a considerable, a wealthy man down there. He runs the Pugh Coal and Oil Company, and his father had, and perhaps he too had shot prairie chicken in their early days. And he asked me if there was land for sale up there. I said, "Oh yes, lots of it." And what was it selling at? Well, $25 an acre was a good price in those days. And in fact, when we got up to 40, I kind of began to resist a little bit. But he said, well, he was willing to make a contribution, a substantial one. Well, $25 was substantial in those days. So I said that'd just be wonderful. And well, about that time, an old fellow up there who had spent his last few years in a Masonic home died, and he owned 160 acres up there. And the Masons were anxious to recover that if possible, so that came on the market. And so, sitting around there, by that time I was a principal over here at Mudville or Midvale School, and I was sitting in the office and I thought, oh, what the hell, and I just picked up the receiver and called him. Well, he said he was lucky. He was on his way to Whiskey Rapids, as he called it, Wisconsin Rapids, that afternoon, and he'd stop and we'd out at the airport, and we'd have a drink together. And how much can you raise in Madison? Well, I said I didn't know, but perhaps it was half of it, and I was just bluffing because I had no real leads. And then I called a guy by the name of Penn at the university and got some maps of the area, etc., and showed up out there, and we talked, and he said yes, he'd pay for half of it. So we were off and running on a sizable piece of land. I think that was probably $30 an acre, I don't know, but it was in the 20, 25, 30 range. And we
Paul, what was the condition of that land back then when you were paying $25 or $30 an acre? Was it old abandoned grazed agricultural field?
Yeah, it was abandoned, and it was grazed somewhat, and converting to brush rapidly. And this, of course, was our big worry, and still is, because actually that wasn't to begin with a prairie, and still requires management. I frequently, in some of our natural areas, have a little annoyance at management. But
tell me more about that, if you would. What sort of criticisms do you have towards management? What do you see going on or not going on that should or shouldn't?
well, I don't know. I just have a feeling that if we're buying a natural area, we should let it be natural. But without any question, burning is necessary to develop a prairie, or at least a bluegrass prairie, not a true one perhaps, maybe someday a true one. But I just not real enthusiastic about interference in natural areas. And well, at any rate, I'd called up there, and Ozzie Matson said this would be a good chunk for us, and some of it was pretty much woodsy, I guess, or third grade brush growing up. And, well, that was fine. I had an offer for half of the money. And I think that was around $2,500 or something like that. When the check came, it was for $5,000. And that was the biggest check I had gotten as a contribution for a long, or ever really.
A lot of money back
Yes,
then.
it was a lot of money. And so we bought the land. Now, actually, we bought all but a 40-acre of it. A fellow by the name of Reuben Paulson bought the other 40. And so we had 160 acres. That was pretty good. In the interim, I was publishing a little newsletter that I sent out 4 times a year when I was lucky, called the Prairie Chicken. And we'd gotten tax exemption from the federal government. Wiley, who preceded as well, I guess he preceded Gaylord as senator, as Proxmire as well, worked on that, and we got exemption, and but we never did get property tax exemption, and still don't. And this is the overwhelming problem in acquiring natural areas. For example, the Prairie Chicken today, which now runs around 11,000 acres, but I think this year the taxes on the area up there between us and the Society Timpanouquas Cupido Pinedas, which is another story, just about 100,000. That's it.
Where does that money come from then?
The state.
I see. So the state has to pay that
Yes.
$100,000 each year.
Yes, and that is what's going to break the back
Yeah.
eventually. Well, we had drawn up a 99-year lease agreement. Emil Kaminsky, maybe you remember him.
Yes, I do.
Emil was the guy who drew it up for us, and I told him I wanted it absolutely protect the land and not us. And when he finished the lease arrangement, he said, "This is the most unfair lease I have ever drawn," and it was in favor, of course, of the Conservation Commission and Department in those days. Well, at any rate, we got that, and then we were kind of off and running. And then for the next 20 years, the money just kept coming in. I used to say it was like a damn leaking faucet. You couldn't shut it off. And
That's the kind of leaky faucet to have, though, isn't it?
oh, you betcha. And I'd come home from school, and there'd be a letter from Racine here, and then there'd be a check for $10,000, $8,000 or something like that. I hadn't asked for it, and there it was. And I also he wanted me to spend it. He said, "Prairie chickens don't boom in the bank. If I wanted the money in the bank, I'd put it in the bank."
That's a nice saying, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
It's a nice saying.
Yeah, it was remarkable.
Yes, it is.
Apparently, he had a lot of money in the settlement of his mother, who owned a chunk of it, and so forth, his mother's estate, and he was... Actually, I had become what amounts to his tax foundation,
Okay.
and this was very fine.
Yes, it is.
And several times when I bought land, I wondered about it because I wasn't always sure. Didn't always have quite enough cash either. Might lose it. He'd say, "Well, the money's yours. I gave you the money to use. You use it. I don't want to have anything to say about it." So I had, and furthermore, by that time, our committee of the Dane County Conservation League, where we'd had a couple of people who were with me with it. Bill Seeker, who was an attorney here in town, did all that land work for nothing for us.
Okay.
And I suppose that he might have done 120 title searches and so forth, and that's the most.
Now, Paul, I used to have some land on what's known as Norwegian Hollow Road, which is just west of Highway 23 near Governor Dodge State Park. And as I recall, Bill Seeker owned some land with another fellow by the name of Matthews down there. Does that ring a bell to you?
Yeah, that's Bill Seeker.
Okay.
And the Matthews is Rod Matthews,
Okay.
who's presently the chairman of the board of Dane County.
I see.
It's his son-in-law.
Okay.
And Bill is a tremendous enthusiast for moths and hawk, especially hawk moths.
Okay.
I've been said that he was the best authority in the United States
Okay.
on that.
In fact, I remember seeing some lights at night that would attract moths at the house there.
That was Bill.
Okay.
He also had a place up in Door County on Kangaroo Lake, which was a family cottage and he's collected moths, and heck, we used to go out to and he got my daughter interested and me through that. We used to go out and get cataculas up at that's the underwing moth.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with those.
Up at Ferry's Bluff.
Oh, yeah.
And then later, quite a few years later, the Nature Conservancy bought that chunk, and now it's quite an eagle refuge.
Yes, it is. I've been there a number of times.
And so,
do you have any feelings on Door County? We won't spend much time on this, but a lot of people are worried that Door County is being over-commercialized and that the Chicago influence is changing the old Door County character. Do you have any opinions on that?
well, I'm sure it's true. The Nature Conservancy bought quite a few places up there, Toff Point and several others, and I never really cared much for Door County. It was sort of an artsy, folksy joint, but we did buy some nice pieces of land up there, particularly Toff Point, which we gave to the University at Green Bay.
That's right, yes. Did you ever meet Emma Toff?
Yes.
You do. I'd like to have you talk a little bit about her and what you recall about her.
Well, she was rather an elderly spinster, rather tall, thin lady, and she was a great conservationist, but she didn't want any deer hunting on her piece. And she used to patrol the road up there with a shotgun during the deer season, I don't know. But she did shoot ducks.
She did shoot ducks?
Yeah. She was interested in an area which was over a ways, a muddy area, quite a ways over, and she used to go there and shoot ducks. And I remember when we bought her area, we spent some time up there, and it was a nice area, very nice area. But that woods was overgrazed, my God, by deer. There was a typical browse line all over the place up there. But that was her.
So the deer then were to the point where they were damaging the vegetation?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
Yes, they were.
Did you ever meet the landscape architect Jens Jensen that has the clearing there at Ellison Bay?
No, I did not.
Okay. He was a good friend of Emma Toff's.
Yes.
Do you recall hearing anything about Jens Jensen or what kind of character he was?
I remember reading about him, but I never knew him.
Okay.
And then the guy, that naturalist up there, that
Roy Lucas?
Roy Lucas.
Yes, he's quite a fellow.
we met him too.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Now,
go ahead.
I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about your knowledge of some of the great Wisconsin naturalists that we've been talking about. I understand you never met Aldo Leopold, although you did work very closely with the Hammerstroms that were both graduate students with Aldo Leopold. What did the Hammerstroms recollect about Leopold? They must have talked to you about him.
Well, not really much.
Okay.
But I did have the younger girl, I don't remember what her name
Would
is.
it be Estelle?
Yeah,
Stella?
yeah. In school at West High, when I taught there. And then when I moved out here, when we built this house, and it was really another one of these series of things that just build up. A fellow by the name of Simon had a paint store, and I was able to buy paint at painters' prices over there. He was also an archer, and so my God, if I didn't come home carrying a bow and arrow one day, I got out of the car, and before I got into the house, a guy across the street was over here. Are you an archer? I said, I just bought this today. Bill Feeney, his name was.
Bill Feeney, okay.
You perhaps know of him, too.
I've heard the name,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, he was the guy who recommended the big double season, I think it was in 1948, the deer season.
Okay.
First a buck and then a doe season.
Right.
And the kill, I think, was 148,000, and that was unheard of. And,
Back then, it sure was.
and boy, was there an uproar. And it was always said that, the guy who was chairman of the department at that time, what the heck was his name? I knew him, too. He lived down here a few blocks. I had his kids in school.
It wasn't Ernie Swift.
It was Ernie Swift.
It was Ernie Swift. You knew
Yeah.
him, too. Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some recollections on Ernie, too.
I don't know too much about Ernie, except I did know his kids again, or his kid.
Yes.
And it was always said that Ernie Swift made Bill Feeney the goat of that deer kill.
Okay.
They also used to say that he was had a way of being cruel.
Ernie did.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
In what way? Did you ever hear examples of how he could be cruel?
Yeah, if you there's something he was going to give you hell about. And it was just before your vacation, let's say at Christmas time. You might have a few days off then. He'd make an appointment for you to see him after your vacation,
Okay.
which meant that during that time you just sat and sweat blood all
Yes,
that time.
You would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
That'd be quite a pressure.
Yeah, well,
That is kind of cruel. In a way.
yeah. At any rate, I don't know how the hell I got on. Oh, yeah, Bill Feeney.
Mm-hmm.
He's also supposed to be the best man on snowshoes in the state of Wisconsin. He and Fred Hammerstrom, according to the old guys, could kill anybody in the woods and took delight in doing it, making their treks through the snow.
Yes.
At any rate, Bill, I think now, last I heard of him or saw him, he was up at Trago, running a place up there. Well, anyway, he got me interested in bow and arrow hunting. And he was a student of Leopold's and had hawks over there. He was a great hawk man. And he'd have them out on the yard once in a while in a metal thing stuck in the ground. And he also raised carrier pigeons. And I did get to know him a little bit and hunted with him once up at Ladysmith on one of those out in the woods. Well, at any rate, I don't know how I got into that. Oh, and I did call Leopold once, and to my eternal shame, I complained to them when they opened up the Lodi country up here to gun season, because I knew that, well, I thought, and it turned out I was correct on that that would be the end of large numbers of deer up there. At any rate,
So you had a conversation with Leopold?
over the telephone.
And how did he respond to you?
Well, he said that it was necessary that herd be reduced.
I see.
And
You didn't agree with that?
I didn't agree with that.
Didn't agree with that.
And I was wrong.
Well,
And Leopold has always been right.
Well, not really. Leopold made a lot of mistakes, as he's even admitted through his writings over the course of his lifetime. You know, he evolved into what he finally, became. But a good example of that would be when he shot the wolf, in the Southwest, or when he experimented with the lack of predators, mainly wolves, again, in the Kaibab region. So he wasn't always right, Paul. You probably had some good criticism, but he may have been right that time.
He was right.
Now, you mentioned you had his youngest daughter as a student of yours at West High School.
Yes.
Back in the 40s. Now, what do you recall about Estelle? She went on to become quite a famous naturalist, botanist in her own right, and studied here at the university, and then went on and got graduate degrees elsewhere. What do you recall about her as a student or about the family? I understand they lived right across from West High School.
Yes. I saw Mrs. Leopold twice is all. Once when she, and it probably was Estelle, demonstrated bow and arrow shooting, and that got me very interested. In fact, that's probably the reason I bought that bow and arrow. And then Estelle was here at the university, as you say. And at that time I was heavy in Nature Conservancy, and she was one of the national board members. And she was a problem for him, just as I became a problem for him, because we both felt in many respects, although they were doing a lot of good work, and they really have, they were a rich man's plaything.
Yes, they've been accused of that as kind of an elite group.
Yes. And then went out, and I don't know what year that was, out to Montauk or something like that, out in New York. It's a famous resort up there in the hills.
Okay, I think I've heard of it.
I think Carnegie was the founder of the place. She was there, and we had several conversations there, and tried a small palace revolution. I don't remember what it was about. It didn't work anyway.
It didn't work.
And had a
She
couple.
was an ally of yours then?
Yes.
She agreed, okay.
She agreed.
Yes.
And well, anyway, I got into bow and arrow then, and then from bow and arrow work, there was the Dane County Conservation League had a Madison Archery Club, which used to be downstairs in the basement, old pool hall, next to where the old Madison Gas and Electric Company was.
Is that Gilman Street or Gorham I think?
I don't think it's either one of them.
Either one of those.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it goes right past there, and then there was Egan and Kelly's was next to it, was a famous old eating place in the old days.
Oh, that's way before my time.
Yeah.
As far back as I can recollect, I know Gordy Bentley had something. It was kind of a billiard hall there. I think it was off State Street a ways on Gorham. And it seems to me that the Archery Center was there for a while, and it may have turned into something like Unique Billiards or something like that later.
Well, this was down in the basement,
Okay, all right.
and
Different place.
the floor always rotted out,
Okay.
so they gave up on it, but it was a good place to shoot. It was 30 yards long,
Yes.
and there were pillars in betwixt the places, so you could have 4 shooting areas at 4 at each place, and then you could walk down, didn't have to wait for the whole 16 of them to get down there and collect the arrows. And well, I got interested in that, and through that I got to know a remarkable person in this town by the name of Harold Starkweather.
Oh yes, Starkweather Creek, of course. Too.
Well, I guess that wasn't named after him.
It wasn't. Okay,
No.
it comes to mind.
Yeah, Starkweather Creek he lives next to out there.
Okay, but I know that he's been very active too in Dane County conservation
Yeah.
matters. Yes.
Yeah, he's a pirate, a great guy. And there, of course, he's always promoting something, and he knew I was in the school business, of course, and at that time the Davenport sat right where we are now, and I remember him coming out here and getting me all steamed up about starting a fisheries program
Yeah.
with the kids in the summertime. They were working the Black Earth Creek then. And we got started out there. We had 20 boys to start with.
What year do you think this would have been, Paul?
Oh, well, my son was in 8th grade at the time. I had a bunch of suckers, lined up. And, gosh, Well, must have been 52, 3, something like that.
Okay, early 50s then.
And or was it the 60s? Probably was the 60s, the early 60s.
You think it was the 60s then?
I think so.
What DNR personnel were you working with or cooperating with on the Black Earth Creek work?
Yeah, well, that was Elmer Herman was the boss out here. He'd just come back down from up at, I think he was at Spooner.
I think you're right.
And Eddie Hillebrandt was the guy who was kind of worked on the creek.
Yeah.
And we just kind of fit in with the department that was working down there.
Okay.
And I think they kind of considered us a nuisance, but we nevertheless did.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
And
That's okay.
we got started and used their bus to begin with, that they used to haul the girls out to Nevin from the edge of town where and we'd have to get back so that Eddie could, who was driving, could take them.
Okay, this is the second side now and a continuation of the interview on February 19th, 1987 at the home of Paul Olson here in Madison. Paul was talking about some of the early efforts in improving the fishery on Black Earth Creek and working with some of the DNR personnel on that, and I'll turn it back over to Paul.
Well, we then moved up quite a bit. At one time, that fisheries and forest deal got up to as many as 90 kids in the summertime. And one of the most important people in the bunch was Jim Zimmerman, who everybody knows, I think.
In fact, Paul, Jim is one of my advisors now at graduate school, and Jim and I have worked real close together on a number of projects, and I consider him a very close friend. And, he's a heck of an ecologist.
He sure is. I used to say that since Roger Bacon, who was the last man to know everything, Jim Zimmerman is the next one.
That's really well put. I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I would agree with you.
Well, at any rate,
I have a very high regard for the man.
he was tremendous. And Jenna Klein was from the Arboretum, was out there.
Jenna well, too.
In fact, I had her as a student at school at
that's
West High
interesting.
years ago.
In fact, I know she came back to graduate school quite late in life and picked up a PhD in botany.
Yeah, from Grant Cottam.
That's right, Grant Cottam, yes.
Yeah.
He's another one that I was fortunate enough to have as a professor in a couple of courses before he retired.
Did you ever have Hugh Iltis?
Yes, I know Hugh Iltis well, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a number of courses from Hugh Iltis and have worked with him, too, on some projects.
Yeah. Well, Hugh was quite a guy, and Grant was quite a guy.
Yes.
And all these people, they're wonderful people.
Yes.
And, well, I don't know where I got into that. Anyway, the school program grew like topsy, and in the summertime, and these people all had something to do with it. If you want to get back to the chicken for a minute.
Why don't we, Paul? That's sure.
We kept getting money, and so I was not pinched for money, and on top of that, I had no one to tell me what to do with it, because sure, we called it the Prairie Chicken Foundation, but they had really two members, me who ran it, and Bill Pugh who gave me the money. I never had to have a committee meeting to decide to do this, and I listened mostly to Ozzie Matson up there, who lived right on the marsh and who knew everybody who was going broke and whose land was fitted in well.
Okay.
And without Oz, you couldn't have done it.
Now, you mentioned Ozzie before to me. Was he a DNR employee at
Yes.
the time, or a Wisconsin Conservation Department employee?
Yes.
Now, he also lives at Black River Falls now, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
And after quite a few years, maybe 15 or so, he retired and went to work for the Coleman Lake operation up there. It's, I think, near Green Bay, up in that country someplace. and he has a manager up there. I think he got to know the Pullmans, who were big in Coleman Lake through the prairie chicken movement, and the Pullmans used to come to our meeting, not to Dane County meetings, but to the Timpanoukas meetings.
Okay.
Any rate,
Now their name is Pullman, Pullman.
I think they were the Pullman Car Company.
That's what I was going to ask you, if there was any link there. Okay.
I think there was. And, well, I don't know. A number of years had gone by, and we had acquired some land, maybe 500 or so acres. And we thought that was pretty damn good for a two-bit operation, and it was.
Yes, it is. Very good.
And then I got called up to the mead at Wisconsin Rapids by the old Wisconsin Conservation League. Now, the old Wisconsin Conservation League was formed in opposition to Governor Heil back in the old days, when Heil started monkeying with the Wisconsin Conservation Commission.
What year do you think that would have been, Paul?
Well, Heil, you can certainly find that out.
I can find that out.
He used to call him, he was known as Julius the Just, but the rest of us called him just Julius.
Okay. I'll look into that.
He was, it was formed up in the old Park Hotel by a number of prominent Republicans who objected to that interference. One of them, and he might still be alive, was the big prairie chicken guy up at, not prairie chicken, but he was in that. All those little round berries. Wisconsin Rapids, the marshes.
Yeah, cranberries?
Cranberries,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
He was the cranberry king up there. I've forgotten his name, but...
Ocean Spray, the Ocean Spray cranberry, people own quite a bit of land up in that country.
Yeah, well, he might have been one of the early, but I think that was before Ocean Spray was moving very much. Well, that was he, and then there was an old lawyer who was kind of a miserable coot by the name of Obernick. You may have heard of him from up in the north.
Yeah.
And there was Dick Deerwester, who was, his brother was very active in the conservation department, and he was from Green Lake. And then, there were several others. Anyway, they formed this Wisconsin Conservation League to fight Heil. Well, and as I am wont to say, there's no need really to fight too hard for governors or presidents, because in time they all pass away.
That's right.
That's right.
How can you debate that?
Yeah. And so Heil was gone. Heil wanted to appoint his guide from up north as the guy who had the DNR. Hell, he knows more about fishing, hunting, those guys who sit around their dead butt in Madison. And
how do you feel about that?
Well, they're wrong.
Yes, they're wrong.
I've gotten so that I am so DNR possessed that I probably am overdue how good these guys were. But geez, I've known a lot of good guys, especially in the game department. Bob Smith, Bert Dahlberg, and awful lot of good guys.
Did you know George Knudsen?
Yes.
Okay, George is quite a fellow too. He's a good naturalist.
Yes, he is.
Now retired.
Yeah.
I just saw him a few weeks ago at my father's retirement party, Paul. He's now working on a book, in fact, George is.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. I would agree, though, that there certainly has been a lot of good people in the department.
Yeah. Well, they were having their meeting. They said, well, Paul, what they did after Heil was gone, they had some money left. They didn't know what the hell to do with it, so Deerwester talked them into buying a piece up on the Buena Vista, 160 acres. Okay. I'm not so sure that isn't the spot there where that picture was painted.
Okay.
It was on the west side of the...
It's a beautiful painting. Who did that, Paul?
That was Crazy Dutchman, who painted here for a while. I'll think of his name in a minute.
You've probably seen the prairie chicken paintings or renderings that Owen Grommy has done too, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yes, those are nice.
Yeah, Owen's a great one, of course. That was usually on the cover for the old DNR, or not DNR, it was Conservation Commission bulletin. And when I retired, my brethren on the commission gave that to me.
That's the original, isn't it?
That's the original,
That's
yeah.
That's a real nice thing to have.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Well, at any
no
rate,
one deserves it anymore.
thank you.
So I say
Yeah.
that. Well, let me ask you a few questions, Paul, and I'll have you respond again. You've been really doing very well in your recollections. Being more specific now in terms of your philosophy regarding prairie chickens in general, or prairie chicken management and, say, reintroduction and reestablishment of prairie chicken populations in the state. Before we had the tape on, when I first came in here, I mentioned to you an idea that I've had, and you've informed me that others have had it for years too, that why don't we try to reintroduce prairie chickens now in more of these preserved and restored prairies that we have in the state, and say, rather than focus a lot of attention on propagating pheasants for shooting opportunities, why don't we be done with raising exotic sport poultry and use the present pointet propagation facilities and personnel for reestablishing and reintroducing some of these native extirpated species of birds. And I'd like to have your opinion on that and some of your past experiences with that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I've had experience both sides of it. I used to go out to our pheasant pens out here at 11 o'clock and check whether or not the heaters were on and so forth. And then the boys would rebuild the pens from time to time, and they wouldn't get quite done, and so I'd bring my kids up from the forest for 2-3 days and pound posts and that sort of thing. Well, yes, that would be marvelous. My only experience in reintroducing the chicken occurred up in Creeks Meadows, where I was one of the guys who bought land during the Gaylord Nelson period, and I was on the land committee with old Charlie Smith, and we used to buy a lot of land up there at Creeks. Got to know Norm Stone very well.
Norm, I've heard, was a bit of a controversial figure.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was a free spirit of a sort. Burn, 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 burn. Scorched earth policy. And it looked like chicken country to me, the Creeks did. And it did a lot of other people too. And we'd been anxious to reintroduce a chicken up there. But it was never possible to raise them like pheasants. They'd lay eggs and the birds would hatch, but they'd die. And they tried all sorts of things. Like I even heard of a fellow who had an agitated screen. He put maggots on there to give them motion and so forth. Because I guess they
That's an interesting.
I think they lived largely on insects, etc., which is sometimes the reason why, although you get a good hatch, by the time you get along a ways, the birds aren't there anymore.
Okay.
Well, at any event,
Paul, I was going to ask you, if one were to go about trying to reintroduce some prairie chickens, a prairie chicken population on a restored prairie, we'll say, how large of a habitat space would you think it would be a minimum requirement for, say, for a population that would be maintained at perhaps a couple dozen birds at least?
well, I don't know. You get down to a couple dozen birds, and I'm sure there are little pockets here and there
Okay.
where there are limited habitat and a couple dozen birds. The birds fly out of Buena Vista in the
Yeah.
wintertime, and they don't always all get back. But I would say it would be okay, you want a shot in the dark?
Sure. Let's just use. Okay, we're back on. I was asking Paul what he feels would be a minimum unit area to support a stable population of prairie chickens, and we were throwing numbers around just in an arbitrary fashion. Now let's just use, for the sake of figures, a unit area of habitat of 100 acres, Paul. And how many birds do you think, if the habitat were prime, could be maintained on say, on each 100 acres of suitable habitat?
Well, I don't think it'd be very many, but I don't know that. When the Hammerstroms did their booklet they had selected pieces around there in the marsh where they, which is a misnomer, by the way, it's not a marsh, but
what would you call it, Paul? What type of community is it?
Well, it's bluegrass country. It was maintained by bluegrass, you know. They
Now you're actually speaking of the bluegrass rather than blue stem, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And for years before we got into it, the largest, it was mostly a bluegrass seed operation. And the big farm up there, the Sumner property, which we finally bought, which was a couple thousand acres, was bluegrass seed. And in Illinois, I understand, it's based on the red top industry.
A fescue grass, then,
Is it?
Yes,
I
believe
don't.
so.
Well, they didn't harvest until late in the season, and the annual mowing, kept the brush down, and it was poor country, damn poor country. We used to call it the Great Dead Heart of Wisconsin, and I've always said thank God for poverty, because if it wasn't for poverty in the land, there wouldn't be anything left that I wanted.
That's very true. And
Yeah.
in fact, I think Leopold more or less expressed that dictum when he talked about poor land but rich country in the sand counties. And
Yeah.
those counties that are not nutrient rich enough to put out these high yields of corn, for instance.
Yeah.
But yet their salvation was in the sand.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where I got into that. That's one of my favorite things to say.
It's a nice saying. Keep saying it.
But
Also very true.
yeah, he had patches all over there, you know. Fred did. And by the way, Oz was with him on that pamphlet. Their department still should have some. I have one or two left around here. And of course, we never fulfilled that, because when we bought something, it usually was more than 40 acres. You could get a whole farm. By a whole farm, that wasn't such a hell of a lot, but might be a couple hundred acres.
What was your standard practice, Paul, when you'd pick up a farm, you'd acquire it? What would you do with the buildings that existed on it?
Most of them we got rid of,
Okay, most of them we did.
but some of them we didn't. But most of them we did,
Okay.
and they moved them different places, or they were wrecks anyway.
Yeah, okay.
And most of the tax value in the land was actually in the buildings,
That's right. That's another
poor
thing.
as they were.
Yes.
And
Of course, you weren't interested in paying taxes on buildings you didn't want to use or weren't suitable for you.
well, at any rate, you'd find it awful tough on 100 acres.
Okay. And the other thing I got to thinking about when I was listening to you talk about it, it's difficult to put a acre size on a unit area that would support a chicken population anyway, I think, because they require a number of different plant community types and
Yeah.
habitat types, and as you well know. And so, what would be your suggestions to people trying, say, to restore populations of prairie chickens in the state and try to reintroduce the birds so that we have more than just one population, basically at Buena Vista? My philosophy is that we could start creating these little prairie chicken pockets or population pockets around the state, hoping that natural reproduction will occur and that predation won't be such a factor to totally wipe out, the reintroduced birds. Give me some help on that with your experience. What do you think would be some helpful suggestions for you?
Well, to a degree, we're doing something like that north of Buena Vista up there in what's now called the Paul Olson area.
Yeah.
That
Has that got an official designation as such yet?
Yes, it has.
It does.
Well, there's the dedication picture.
Well, that's wonderful. I wasn't aware of that. I've heard it referred to. I didn't realize it was official. I'll look at that in a little bit.
Well, that happened accidentally, of course, like everything else does. They were talking about this area, which is up in north of there quite a ways, and is on pretty good soil.
Now, the Paul Olson area is nearest what town then?
I'm trying to think. It's near Wisconsin Rapids, but it's north and east of there quite a ways.
So it's north and probably east then of the Mead too. You say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it came up before the DNR board, discussion on it. We were buying land, and there we're not leasing it. We are giving it outright.
Okay.
And I think we have maybe 800 or so acres scattered around up there. And John Lawton, who is a great friend of mine,
Yes.
said, Sherry Siegel. Who in the hell is Sherry Siegel? Is she a sister of Johnny's? And no, that was the name of the two townships.
Okay. Okay.
So he said, well, let's name it after Paul Olson. So that,
John Lawton suggested
yeah,
that. Well, that's
mhm.
good. That's
Yeah.
a nice honor.
and the guy from up there who's used to be at least a postmaster up in that area, forgotten his name, he's on the commission, he knew me too, and so it got named, and after a year or so they put up a sign, and it was dedicated at any rate. Well, there's an area where there were some birds there, and there was also interchange of birds there between there and the Buena Vista. It might be 20 miles.
Okay.
But birds had been tagged there and seen on the Buena Vista and vice versa.
Okay.
So it was near to a source, so to speak.
Yes.
And it's much richer land. And, well, at any rate, so it has, and in the Mead, too, there are some birds. And after our failure to use pen-raised birds up at Creeks, we did trap some birds off the Mead and moved them up there.
You mentioned earlier before the tape recorder was going again that you acquired the birds that you used for the population at Creeks from Jamestown, North Dakota. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Apparently that guy finally learned how to raise the damn things. I always was kind of happy you couldn't raise them artificially.
Yeah, I see,
That,
I see your point.
That's a emotional thing. But at any rate,
Well, Paul, what do you think is what is the key ingredient to prime prairie chicken habitat, if there is such a thing? What do you think that they just have to have to exist at all?
well, they have to have grass, of course,
Yes.
and I think open spaces.
Okay.
You can see the horizon in prairie chicken country.
What would you think then? What is the reason that prairie chickens became almost extirpated in our state? We just about lost them completely. What do you think? What's the factor to attribute to the decline in prairie chickens? Is it just loss of habitat, or do you think it was market gunning, or maybe a combination of all those things?
Well, I don't think it was market gunning,
Okay.
because we were well past the market gunning stage. I think the last open season was in 1957 or 58 in Wisconsin. But they sure were down.
Yes.
And
Historically, though, I've read accounts where, or you've seen these old photos of market gunners holding literally hundreds of birds,
Yeah.
and where they ship truckloads or boxcars of them to Chicago,
yes,
and that kind of thing.
yes, that was true.
Yes.
And I've seen stories, and there's one old guy out here at Mazamani, who shows up anytime we discuss prairie chicken at Dane County. He tells on how he shot them as a boy and so forth.
Did he shoot them at the Mazamani Public
Yes,
Ground area, that
yes.
area north of town?
Yes. And then the last bird that was seen in Wisconsin, I think, was seen by, well, he's the guy I replaced in the commission, a very well-known bird man from the university. I'll think of his name after a minute, too.
Is it Joseph Hickey?
No,
No?
no. He was at the department, though. What the heck. He saw it flying over Lake Mendota.
It's not coming to me either, Paul.
Yeah. Well,
At any rate.
I had his kids in school, too.
Okay.
If you taught in the west side of Madison, all those 42 years that I did, you had everybody in school.
Okay.
They all went
Okay.
there. Well, at any rate, I think it was loss of habitat. But after we started the chicken program, and we're acquiring land, and every year the number of birds went down and down and down, and I had to report that because I always was reasonably honest. They'd say, well, what in the hell's the matter? You guys are getting more area. And I begin to wonder whether or not habitat was the gospel that I'd been taught, was indeed correct. Well, I guess it was, because things did turn around, and you have to have a certain minimum, I think. And
Can you throw out a figure, Paul, as to what would be that certain minimum to even attempt to restore a population?
well,
Did you, in your own experience, do you recall when the population really started to thrive as your acquisition evolved and as your land area became greater? Was there a certain point that you arrived at where the population seemed to really burst?
well, I don't recall that, but there's never too much land.
That's true. That's for sure. Never enough.
But I don't know. If you wanted me to shoot from the hip, I'd say 1,000 acres.
Okay, I think that's a fair figure.
And it has to be managed, or the damn brush will move in.
So burning then is
Burning,
essential.
yes.
Okay.
And the burning at the Buena Vista gave us problems because it got into the peat, and you'd have long-lasting burns there.
Yes.
And then they started to use chemicals, and I think that had a great deal to do with it. And they may be bad. We don't know the story there yet.
We don't. No, not enough time has
Yeah.
elapsed.
But at any rate, they did turn, I think, in the middle 70s or thereabouts. The turnabout came,
So it's just been quite recently then.
yes. The number of birds that
Yeah.
began increasing. And there's a cycle, too. The old 7-11.
Explain that, Paul.
Well, that was Wally Grange's figure. On years ending in 7, you hit the bottom of the cycle. And on years that ending in 1, so right now we're down. We've been going down the last couple of years, although they thought last year it might be on its way up. But this year, as I've talked to the boys a couple times on the phone, they aren't up yet.
So what you're saying then is there's a 4-year gradual rise,
Yeah.
and then followed by a 6-year decline.
Yeah.
I see.
And that cycle has always intrigued me as one of the great mysteries. I think it was the guy Pope, who came out with that first, didn't he?
That, I think, is correct.
Yeah.
And I think, in fact, when I think about it now, going back to game management classes and ornithology and so on, that the sharp-tail cycle is very similar to that.
I would suppose so.
Yeah.
And I think the chicken are about the northern limit here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
And probably probably they're more susceptible. And our hope was that On the 11 years, it would be higher than it was the last 11, and the 7 years would be lower. That we could, and I think probably have done that.
Yeah. Before I forget to ask you, you mentioned the primary factor in the loss of the chickens at Crex Meadows was predation.
Yes.
Is that right? Now, what were they being predated upon mostly by birds of prey, including, say, great horned owls, or was it mostly fox or weasel, mink, whatever?
Those were, we built a big pen up there.
Okay.
Kept them over winter.
Okay.
And that is also on the hawk migration route, you know.
Oh, yes, it is. That's right. Yeah.
Coming down from Superior, and Jesus, they would spook the birds something fierce. So they built, put some 2x4s in there and laid brush across them. And the weasel would sit on the outside and look in. And they opened up the gates and let the birds out, and I think in 2 or 3 days the whole outfit, I think we had a couple thousand birds there. We'd gotten quite a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And
now, how were those acquired? Were they purchased outright, or was there a reciprocity agreement with North Dakota, say, for ruffed grouse or whatever, like the turkeys in Wisconsin?
I don't know if there was reciprocity.
Okay.
I think the guy just had all these birds left over and didn't know what the hell to do with them.
I see. Okay.
And Wisconsin acquired them. And Bill Pugh gave me $4,000 to build the pens up there. And
do those pens still exist, Paul?
I don't know. I haven't been up there now in a couple years.
Okay.
We did it the second year too, with the same results. Then they trapped some birds down on the mead, and brought them up there.
Okay. Now, what I have talked with the people the interpretive naturalist wildlife manager at the Crex within the last year, a fellow by the name of James Huffler. And okay, this is side 3 now of the Paul Olson interview on February 19th, 1987. The recording is pretty much just in a general rambling riverboat rambler style. Paul's just recollecting all kinds of interesting issues and memories that are associated with some of the pioneer efforts in terms of some of these early conservation programs in Wisconsin. So I'm once again going to turn it over to Paul, and I think he's going to start out talking about the establishment of the Prairie Chicken Society, which he was instrumental in that.
Yeah, we these chaps that had the old Wisconsin Conservation League had grown old. I guess Deer Wester was dying of cancer, etc. And so they called me to meet them up at the mead. And we did, and they said, well, now, your new outfit, the Prairie Chicken Foundation, is doing exactly what we had hoped to do, and we are getting along in years, and we'd like to give you our land and our checkbook, which amounted to about $700, and then let you carry it on. So, well, you can't beat that. So in my little Prairie Chicken newsletter, I wrote a hail and farewell note. You guys were there first, you were there before us, and thank you, and that sort of thing. Bingo, the telephone rang. Bill Sullivan in Milwaukee. He's one of the great dynamic driving forces in Wisconsin. They tell a story about how he met Dory Valier, who you may have heard of, out in a airport out east somewhere. They were both waiting for a plane, and she said, "Bill, you got to do something about the prairie chicken in Wisconsin." And his great statement, which is repeated endlessly, is, "Hell, I didn't know they were in trouble." And he had contributed to me, like $25 or something like that. And he said, and oh yes, one of the things was I was supposed to take down to the Secretary of State and get their charter canceled. And they did have tax exemption, which is not so easy to get.
No, it's not.
You got to prove that you are doing it rather than just saying you're going to. He said, "Have you done that yet?" And I said, "No, I am a school teacher and I never do anything on time." So he said, "Well, you suppose they'd mind if we took it over?" He said, "We'd like to form an organization down here in Milwaukee, and would you mind if we took it over?" I said, "No, I wouldn't mind. I won't give you the land and the money, but as far as the charter is concerned, I don't care." So he talked to the various guys, and another meeting up there, and they rescinded their action of discontinuance and elected Bill Sullivan chairman and Nandi Hendricks as vice chairman, and John Best, who I knew in college just slightly, a very effective attorney in Milwaukee, Michael Best and Frederick. And that was that. Well, about a month later, they changed their name to the Society Timpanoucas Cupido Pinedas. And I thought, Jesus Christ, what a stupid thing to do. Well, that was exactly what stepped them off. And they had a lot of money. I used to say I had one millionaire and they had 100. And they had big parties in Milwaukee. I haven't been to one for several years. I don't get around real much anymore. But they used to have them at the University Club, and then that got too small. They'd have 600 or 700 people there, and the building wouldn't hold it.
Are they still an active group, Paul?
Not very.
Not very. What's happened? Why aren't they active anymore?
Well, the same reason I'm not active anymore. We figure we got the job done.
Okay.
We got the chickens secure, and the land, the department doesn't want to accept the land anymore on lease arrangements for tax reasons, obviously. And
would you think that that tax exemption would be the way to go on some of these lands? Just say public lands that are refuges for, say, prairie chicken populations and so on.
I always wanted to.
Don't you think that makes sense?
Yes, I do think so. And same thing's true of the Nature Conservancy.
Yes.
We always gave our land away to universities because they...
you didn't want to have to pay the taxes.
That's right. And such management as might be required. Well, yes, as a matter of fact, this last year I tried to give our land to the department. You may have known about that.
I've heard about that, yes.
And the boys in the league finally, after 30 years of paying no attention to the department, decided, well, hell, we got a lot of land. Under present day land prices up there, it may be worth $1 million, $1.5 million. Don't know what they might do with it, but they weren't going to. Plus the fact that some of them had typical anti-department. They'd had run-ins with them and so on.
Now there's 11,000 acres you mentioned total up there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a sizable chunk.
Yes, it is. Hell of a lot bigger than the LBJ ranch. But at any rate, they Timpanoucas also is in process now of giving the land there, although once again I don't know if they will do it. But in that case, both pieces of land would go as a gift to the department, whereupon I understand over a 10-year period the taxes drop down and down and down.
That's right. They're in some sort of a sliding scale or something. Yes. Mm-hmm. Who's the kingpin now in the society? Who would be the one to contact on that?
I don't know who the present guy is. The last guy that I knew was Jack Pelisek.
He's in Milwaukee?
Yes. I guess his name isn't Jack, but that's what we've always known him as. He's also an attorney in Michael Best and Frederick.
Oh, okay.
And he was a regent of the University of Wisconsin. I knew him as the young gopher when we first met up there. They'd send him out to do this or that or something else.
Go for this, go for that.
Yeah.
Well, now, how about in Madison? Are there some active members of the society here?
Yes. The guy who's taken over my spot, and I've turned everything over to him. His name is Don Hollatz, Hollatz.
Okay.
He's with the MG&E. I think he's a supervisor of some sort. And I think he's a pretty nice guy and pretty friendly.
Okay.
And the other guy is or was the president, who bought that famous Ed Gein property up there.
Oh, he owns the Ed Gein property.
Yeah.
Does he have that as like a weekend place?
Yes.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And the farm buildings are still standing?
I don't know that. I've never asked him about that.
Yeah, that's gotten national attention.
Yes.
Ed Gein was
Yeah.
quite a guy, for sure.
Yes, he was.
Quite a crazy one, but let's see. You were going to talk a little bit too, Paul, about the establishment of, it was the state chapter of the Nature Conservancy that you were instrumental in.
Yeah.
And that would be, I think, an interesting story as well.
Well, there was a meeting of the Wisconsin Academy of Arts, Letters, and Sciences, and Hugh Iltis was anxious to establish a Wisconsin chapter.
Do you remember what year this would have been?
No.
Okay, probably the 50s somewhere?
Oh, yeah, it was in the 60s.
Well, it was in the 60s, okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
And by that time, I had something of a reputation as a con man in the operation of the chicken,
Yes.
and I also was on the Conservation Commission at that time.
And
So,
by then, I would think the school forest idea was
Yes.
developed too.
yes.
Okay.
So we had a meeting in the Union after a major meeting of the society, the academy, and Hugh Iltis wanted the thing established. I think that our famous botanist, I'm trying to think of his name, too now and can't.
Was it Norman Fassett?
No, later
John
than
Curtis.
John Curtis wasn't very anxious about it. And
Do you remember meeting Curtis?
yes.
What was your impression of him?
Well, I'm not a botanist. I don't know anything about botany. But I remember he was a very nice guy. A real nice guy. And Iltis pushed and pushed and pushed, and they decided to form a chapter, and I was elected temporary chairman. Well, that temporary job lasted 17 years. And
Oh, you'd have to be on geological time to consider that temporary, wouldn't you?
yeah. Well, we got started, and the first big job was Abrams Woods down here.
Oh, yes. Near Albany there.
Yes. And we got enough for one little piece of it, and then another little piece of it, and finally we had it. And Bill Seeker did the legal work on that too, and became the guy who did all the legal work for the conservancy, of which there was quite a few.
Okay.
Well, we got that one, and I think we had 45 members at that time. And
Were most of your members your founding fathers and I guess sisters or mothers, we would say? Were they mostly from the university community?
Yes.
I suspect, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
we used to meet down there in Leopold's old meeting room upstairs.
On Farm Place. There.
Yeah.
Okay, right on the Ag campus.
Yeah.
Yes.
Used to climb up the stairway there and meet. And there was Joe Hickey,
Okay.
and there was Cottam, and there was Iltis, and there was a couple, 3-4 people from the University in Milwaukee. And but it was,
Probably one would be Philip Whitford, I suspect.
yes, Phil Whitford, and the other one was God, I can't think of his name either. You know, names get away from old
Yes,
men.
they do. They get away from young men too.
I'm going to make 78 not so long.
Well, I was going to ask you too to tell me, what your age is now. And Paul, you grew up too around the Mount Horeb area, didn't you?
I was born and raised in Mount Horeb, yeah.
Now, did you grow Mount Horeb, or were you out on the farm?
In Mount Horeb.
In Mount Horeb. So you've got some recollections of the early Mount Horeb days.
Yeah.
Sure.
Alice was down the valley there about 8 miles by Black Earth.
Oh, well, you were down Highway 78?
She was, yeah.
Your wife was?
Yeah.
I see. Okay. What was her maiden name, Paul?
A Divdal.
A Dibdal. Sure, I've heard that name. That's a good Norwegian name.
It sure shall is.
Well, then you're both Norwegians.
Yeah. Well, I'm only half. My mother was German.
Well, it's a lot of Norwegian between the two of you, though.
Yeah.
Well, I won't get you too far astray on those things now, because I want to hear your story about the early days of the Nature Conservancy. So I'll let you get back to
Yeah. Well, we bought that one, and then nearby there's Oliver Prairie.
Yes, and Brault Prairie, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Oliver Prairie, what's his name? Iltis negotiated milking cows with the farmer there. I don't
You
know.
actually milked some cows?
At least he was in the barn at that time. And Shooting Star Hill, they called it. And then, I don't know really what the next one was, but we moved up to Toff Point. And that was a very successful operation up there. We got a big chunk of money out of Bill Sullivan for that. He said he was cleaning out the refrigerator at Christmas, and he found this dough here. You might as well have it.
That's a
And
nice attitude.
yeah, he did know quite a bit about Door County. I don't know that he had a place up there, but he was interested. And after Toff Point, well, I don't know. We moved. I think there were a number of really choice places. As a matter of fact, I said that during my 17 years we grabbed off the choicest chunks of Wisconsin. Although, and during that time, I fought liberally with the National, because at the time we came in, dues were $10 and we got 7 and they got 3, and then all of a sudden it got to be 50-50. And but we always had kept our own checkbook, and our own membership, so that we never got really snowed under, although I'm sure they disliked me. They knew we were successful, but they didn't like me. They used to say, if you come across the border into Wisconsin, Paul Olson will meet you at the state line with a shotgun. It wasn't quite that bad, but
No, I don't suspect it was.
but
Now, when you acquired, we'll just say Tufts Point,
yeah.
I suspect that must have cost, even in those days, probably quite a bit of money.
Yes, if you have to ask me, shoot from memory, I'll say 100,000.
Okay, I was saying,
Yeah.
because I know Door County, a prime piece of real estate like
Yeah.
that, a peninsula, would certainly have a great development
Yeah.
possibilities.
Of course, she wanted it to come to us too.
Okay, did you buy that now directly from the Tuft family?
Yes,
I see. Okay.
and
And the money then, Paul, came from the Wisconsin chapter, and I suspect again the national chapter too.
yeah. Well, we borrowed money from them.
Okay, you borrowed money from
See, they initially they were founded by one of their big pushes was from the Andy Mellon Foundation, and they had, maybe it was $1 million, and they would loan that to you interest free, and then you had to pay it back, or you were supposed to, and we always did.
Okay.
And Mianus Point, I think, or something like Mianus Gorge was their first big one. And Joe Hickey was our treasurer and secretary, and very good. And Emily Early
Yes.
was secretary for a long time. What's his name over here? Peg Watrous.
Oh yes, I've met Peg. Sure. In fact, her daughter is Lynn Ike, I believe.
Yes.
With the Dane County Cultural Affairs Commission.
Yeah.
I know both of them.
Yeah.
Now, what about, was Jim Zimmerman active?
Jim Zimmerman was active.
Yes.
Hmm.
Okay.
And Iltis kind of dropped out finally, and he and Cottam used to squabble like hell.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
Is that the reason Iltis dropped out, you think?
Well, I don't know why he dropped out, but Iltis is a difficult man to get along with.
Yes, he is. I've worked
Yeah.
with him. Yes, he is.
He's
Well-known fact.
yeah, but he's
A bit of a genius, though. In a lot
yes,
of
he
ways,
is.
too.
Yes, he is.
Have to
Yeah,
admit
yeah,
that as well.
yeah. He was. I like Iltis.
Yes, I do too.
And
He's
once
not
in a while-
afraid to speak out and to throw politics to the wind.
Yeah.
He's,
He almost got me arrested once in Milwaukee.
tell me that story. Tell me that story.
We were going down to a conservancy meeting, and they had some grasses. Hell, I don't know what kind of grasses, but they were something planted along the strip there in the middle. I haven't got any of those, he says, for his herbarium. Yeah. That stop. No, so I stopped. Finally, he jumped out and tore out a bunch of them, and I thought that would be something to get pinched for that.
Yes.
At any rate, that's Hugh, hurrying Hugh. And
He did give you mentioned before the tape was on, he gave you a nice honor at your retirement from the Nature Conservancy, didn't he?
yes, he did. That was printed in the Nature Conservancy newsletter, and this must be some around someplace.
Can you recall, tell me a little bit about that day and where it took place and all that.
Well, it took place up at John Muir's spot up there, and we had a nice group, and I retired, and he made some nice things to say about it, and then let's see, who was it? It was the gal from university. Had her kids in school too. Fanny Taylor. I think her husband used to be at least something in the publicity department at the university. And then after her, John Shaw came along. John used to run the university bookstore for many, many years. Had his kids in school too. And God, I don't even know who's president now.
That seems like an appropriate place, though, for the event to take place.
Yeah, it was.
You recall your impression of
Well,
the Muir Park site there?
We were sitting on a hillside in a nice little lake down there. No, I don't recall it especially, but
Okay.
apparently it was historically very important.
Yes, it is.
I remember a guy who runs a tavern up a couple of miles from there.
Would that be the Indian Echoes and
Yes.
Mr. Adrian?
That's the guy.
He, I think, was pretty much the guy that created that park, or went
Yes.
to work for it.
Yeah.
Did you meet him?
Oh, yes.
In fact, I'm interested in hearing your impressions of him, too, and what you recall about him. because
He's quite a guy. Sil Adrian, yeah.
That's right. What do
Yeah.
you recall about Sil?
Well, what I recall about him is that I took my high school archery team up to Montello to shoot, and it was in his kind of barn out there that we shot. But God, that man's got arrowheads coming out of his ears. They're all over the place, and memories galore, and if he knows you're interested in something like this, he pulls out his letters to congressmen from way, way back.
Yes.
If he's still alive, you ought to see him.
In fact, Paul, he passed away, it's been about 5 years ago now, but his widow, Margaret, is still alive and well, teaching piano and organ lessons to many children up there.
Yeah.
And, of course, they sold the tavern, and she lives in a house, though, on the old Indian Echoes grounds overlooking the Fox River. But she's been very good to me in terms of my Muir research. She's opened up and let me, loan me materials that Sil had, and it's been a big help. And I only wish I could have met the man and talked with him.
Well, he was a nice guy. He was fascinated by this, and he worked hard at it. He was a member of the Nature Conservancy too, of course, and a whole bunch of addle-brained liberals were there.
Okay. I also want to just add to the tape today that I've just learned that an area that we mentioned before, north of the Mead Wildlife Area, was dedicated in honor of Paul, and it's a prairie chicken preserve, and I think that's important to note that. And there's a nice picture on the wall in Paul's home here of his wife and Paul in front of the sign marking the area, and it looks, I'll have to get up and visit that. Well, Paul, what haven't we touched on that you'd like to today? You're full of interesting stories. Go ahead and just keep going. If you can think of anything you want to say, go right ahead. And
Well, there's, all these years, quite a few of them. And it's been fun. And as I said, it's all a whole raft of accidents that came together, and I was lucky. Lots of things happened. And
I was going to ask you a little bit about your early years too. Now, did you go to the University of Wisconsin here?
yes.
And you majored in, what was your field?
Well, I majored in history, finally.
Okay.
I started out in journalism. I thought I was something, I wound up in history, and then got a job at West High in 1931. This was quite a while ago.
You were kind of right in the heart of the Depression there, weren't you?
I sure as hell was. Yeah. I used to say the year I was employed here in Madison, they could be very choosy, and they obviously were.
Well, yes, they obviously were. Now, tell me, even about how have you been around Madison and the Mount Horeb area, the greater Madison area now for 78 years. Now, when you look out towards the new development there at Westtown and some of the urban sprawl that's occurring and the downtown, more or less dying, you've obviously seen a lot of changes around here in that much time, almost, over 3/4 of a century.
I sure have.
What's your feelings on the way Madison is going?
Well, I wish it wouldn't grow quite so much.
Yeah.
We used to say, years ago, what is Madison? Madison's an idea in the mind of God. Well, I cut my eye teeth politically on this road out in front of us, the Mineral Point Road.
Yes.
When they were going to enlarge that, and you notice a ways out they have.
Yes, they have.
Well, I fought it,
Good for you.
and I won.
That's great.
I beat Ivan Nestigan.
Well, good.
Uh,
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Well, at any rate,
I just want to inject a comment, though. I don't see a lot of folks anymore taking up issues and fighting for those kinds of causes. And I'm just wondering, where the replacements are coming from,
well, I don't know. We used to have some huge trees out here that we lost not through the road widening, but through they were elms. And my daughter, who is now working with the Sewage Commission up in Minneapolis, and was very active in the ban the can movement and so forth.
Good for her.
Yeah,
Good for her.
I remember her coming by and petting the trees, and that's really what got me going.
No doubt, of course, she absorbed that
Yeah.
from you.
Well, at any rate, she's very much an environmentalist, and I have two sons, both of them lawyers. One of them was with Cates and Lawton,
Oh, that's a good firm.
Yeah.
Yes.
and the other was out here with Cumis,
Oh, yeah.
Gina Mutual.
Okay.
So, yeah, we bought the lot, and I had the first house here in Sunset Village. $350 was the price of lots in those days.
Oh, that's just something. What do you think a lot would be today?
Well, I suppose it'd be 5,000-6,000.
Oh, I would think it'd be more than that. Paul.
Probably, I don't know. And we built the house, and it cost around $6,000 altogether. And now I guess I get 70 for it.
Oh, yes, I'm sure you could.
I don't know where I'd go.
Well, it seems like you have a nice home here.
Yeah, it's very pleasant.
And
Can I help you with something? I didn't mention Karen, no. Well, those kids See, there are 13 of them, those grandchildren.
Oh, you have 13 grandchildren.
Yeah. So,
Paul's wife is also in the room. She's pointed out that Paul forgot one of the children.
my youngest one, I don't know that she's particularly into the conservation movement, but they're great campers, etc.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And, well,
Now, did your wife teach or anything else?
nurse.
She's a nurse.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
If you can get a farm girl who's also a nurse,
That's a good combination.
you've got it made.
Now, what year then did you get married, Paul?
1936.
1936.
The first day of leap year.
First day. Well, it's obviously it was a lucky day. It's
Yes, it
worked out well
was.
for you.
Yeah, it has.
So you have a lovely home here.
Yeah. This leg got shot in 1914, you know.
In World War.
I didn't get shot. I mean, it was polio.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
The year of the Great Madness.
Because I know that World War I was after that, and so well, you've certainly done well though.
Yeah.
Yourself.
I worked on crutches for a long time,
Yeah.
and now do, of course, entirely. But yeah, it's been in some strange places.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now your children, then you have, is it 2 girls and 2 boys?
That's right.
I see. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. And their ages range from what to what?
I think Jim's about 48.
Okay.
Oh no, Pauline, I guess, is 50, 51. She's the oldest. Yeah, down to 35, something like that.
Okay.
And the grandchildren from about 25 down to 3.
Yeah. All your children are married with children of their own now.
Yeah.
Then? I see. Okay.
There are
Okay.
3 of them with 3 and 1 of them with 4.
Now they're all then around the Midwest. One you
Yeah.
mentioned was in what, Minnesota?
Minneapolis, yeah, and the 2 boys are here in Madison, and Pauline's or Karen's in Janesville,
I see. Okay.
which is
So you see them quite a bit then?
yeah,
Close
yeah,
enough for you?
that's right.
Yeah, okay. But they all have an interest in nature and they're environmentally concerned, and
Yeah.
that obviously came from their home upbringing.
Well, I don't know if it did or not, but I think it did.
It did.
I'd like to think so.
Okay. Okay. Well, Paul, any other thoughts or things you'd like to express today on tape? Your feelings on the direction that Wisconsin's landscape is headed in, the countryside. Maybe you could give me your feelings on the family farm crisis. I think that's something that's plaguing Wisconsin farmers now. A lot of foreclosures, and farming is really undergoing quite a metamorphosis now.
Well, I don't really know anything about farming, but yes, the farm problem is a problem, and I'd have to say that I think some of it's their own fault. And I don't know that pouring any more federal funds into it is going to help much either. But some of the set-aside programs may help, but not finally, I don't think. I think one of the big shots in the arm that Wisconsin got was Gaylord Nelson's cigarette tax program, which I was in on from the very beginning on the commission.
You must have felt it quite a loss when Gaylord Nelson was outvoted by Bob Caston supporters.
I couldn't believe it.
I couldn't either, and can't to this day. In fact, Bob Caston, of course, was just reelected again. How do you feel about the state of things politically, with at federal level and also at the state level now with new governor?
Well, of course, I'm a Democrat. I don't think I ever voted for a Republican. I won't carry that to my grave. But Gaylord's loss and then Bob La Follette's loss to McCarthy, those are terrible things. Probably it's the other side of the Wisconsin mystique. There's some evil in us, as well as...
I think you're right, and I think that's true wherever you go.
Yeah. But, I don't know.
Have you had any correspondence with Gaylord Nelson since he's been out of the state?
Not really.
No, okay.
I did make a speech for him once up at when they dedicated Blackjack Springs up in Vilas County. But actually I have seen very little of Gaylor.
Of course, you realize now that just on the north shore of Lake Mendota, we've got a state park now
Yeah.
named in his honor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm impressed with all the fine people you've known throughout your lifetime and had the opportunity to work with.
Well, you know, if you get in an organization
Yes.
and willing to do some work, like sweeping out the hall afterwards, they'll keep you on.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, unless you want to, recollect any more, I would like to just thank you for the time you've spent this afternoon, and you've been a wonderful person to interview, and you're inspirational in the sense that your life has been so rich, and it's something for young people to follow, I think, and to use as a model. You've done a great deal of good for the Wisconsin countryside, no question about it.
Well, thank you a lot. It's been fun. If I had to do over again, I'd do it all the same.
Okay, do you want to quit with that, Paul? I think
Yeah.
that's a good place to end.